Welcome back to Footnotes and Folly and to Herodotus. I am Pemberton. This is part 26, and now the great quarrel between Greece and Persia truly begins. Aristagoras of Miletus, left in charge while Histories is held at Susa, gambles on conquering Naxos, fails, and to save his own skin raises all Ionia in revolt. Histories, far away, sends him the strangest of messages tattooed on a slave's shaven head. Then Aristagoras sails to Greece for help to Sparta, where he unrolls a bronze tablet engraved with all the lands and seas of the earth, and very nearly buys King Cleomenes until a small girl says 6 words that send him packing. And Herodotus pauses to walk us, stage by stage, up the royal road from Sardis to Susa. Let us continue.
Atenes accomplished these things after he had been made commander. After this there was for a short time a lessening of troubles, but then troubles began again to fall on the Ionians a second time, arising from Naxos and Miletus. Naxos was richer than all the other islands, and Miletus at that same time had just reached the height of its prosperity and was the ornament of Ionia. Before these events, however, for 2 generations Miletus had been violently afflicted by faction until the Parians reformed it, for the Milesians chose the Parians, from among all the Hellenes, to be reformers of their state. The Parians reconciled their factions in this way. The best men among them came to Miletus, and when they saw that the Milesians were in a wretchedly ruined condition, they said that they wished to pass through their land. As they went through the whole territory of Miletus, whenever they saw, amid the general desolation, a field that was well cultivated, they wrote down the name of the owner of that field. When they had gone through the whole land and had found only a few such men, they returned to the city, called a general assembly, and appointed these men to manage the state, the men whose fields they had found well cultivated. They said they thought these men would take care of public affairs in the same way that they had taken care of their own. As for the rest of the Milesians, who had previously been divided by factions, the Parians ordered them to obey these men. So the Parians had reformed the Milesians in this way. But at the time of which I am speaking, troubles began to come to Ionia from these states in the following manner. Certain men of the wealthy class in Naxos were driven into exile by the people, and after being exiled they came to Miletus. It happened that Aristagoras, son of Mulpagoras, was in charge as ruler of Miletus. He was both the son-in-law and the cousin of Histories, son of Lysigoras, whom Darius was keeping at Susa. Histories was despot of Miletus, and he happened to be at Susa at this time when the Naxians came. These Naxians had formerly been guests, friends of Histories. When the Naxians arrived, they asked Aristagoras whether perhaps he would supply them with a force, so that they might return from exile to their own land. Aristagoras thought that, if they returned to their own state through his help, he would become ruler of Naxos. At the same time, he used the guests' friendship of Histories as his pretext, and made them this proposal. I cannot promise that I can supply you with enough force to bring you back from exile against the will of the Naxians who control the state, for I hear that the Naxians have an army 8,000 shields strong, and many ships of war. But I will make every effort to devise a means, and this is my plan. It happens that Artaphernes is my friend. You should know that Artaphernes is a son of Hystaspes, and the brother of King Darius, and he rules all the peoples of the sea coasts in Asia, with a great army and many ships. I think this man will do whatever we ask of him. When the Naxians heard this, they handed the matter over to Aristagoras, to manage as best he could. They told him to promise gifts and the expenses of the expedition, saying that they would pay them. They fully expected that once they appeared at Naxos, the Naxians would do whatever they commanded, and the other islanders would do the same. For of those islands, that is, the Cyclades, not one was yet subject to Darius. Aristagoras therefore went to Sardis and told Artaphernes that Naxos was an island not large in size, but nevertheless beautiful and fertile, and near Ionia, also that it contained much wealth and many slaves. Send an expedition against this land then, and restore it to those who are now exiles from it. If you do this first, I have large sums of money ready for you, apart from the expenses incurred for the expedition, which it is fair that we who conduct it should provide. Next, you will win for the king not only Naxos itself, but also the islands dependent upon it, Paros, Andros, and the others called the Cyclades. Setting out from these, you will easily attack Euboea, a large and wealthy island as large as Cyprus and very easy to conquer. 100 ships are enough to subdue all these. You make yourself a messenger of good things for the house of the king, and in all these matters your advice is good, except as to the number of ships. Instead of 100, 200 shall be prepared for you by the beginning of spring. And it is right that the king himself should also approve this matter. When Aristagoras heard this, he went back to Miletus greatly pleased. Meanwhile Artaphernes sent to Susa and reported what Aristagoras had said, and when Darius himself also approved the matter, Artaphernes prepared 200 triremes and a very great multitude both of Persians and of their allies. He appointed as commander of them Megabates, a Persian, one of the Achaemenidae, and a cousin both to himself and to Darius. Later, if the story is true, Pausanias, son of Cleomenes the Lacedaemonian, betrothed himself to the daughter of this Megabates, because he had formed a desire to become despot of Hellas. After appointing Megabates commander, Artaphernes sent the armament away to Aristagoras. Megabates took the force, together with the Naxians, and sailed under the pretense that he was going to the Hellespont. But when he came to Chios, he directed his ships to Caucasa, so that from there he might carry them over to Naxos with the north wind. Then, since it was not fated that the Naxians should be destroyed by this expedition, an event occurred which I will relate. Megabates was going around to inspect the guards posted in the several ships, and it happened that in a ship of Mindos there was no one on guard. He became very angry and ordered his spearmen to find the commander of that ship, whose name was Skylax, and bind him in an oar hole of his ship in such a way that his head should be outside and his body inside. When Skylax had been bound in this way, someone reported to Aristagoras that Megabates had bound his guest, friend from Mindos, and was shamefully insulting him. Aristagoras came and asked the Persian to release him, but obtained none of what he requested, so he went himself and set the man loose. When Megabates learned of this, he was exceedingly angry and burst out in rage against Aristagoras. Aristagoras answered by asking what Megabates had to do with these matters, and whether Artaphernes had not sent him to obey Aristagoras and to sail wherever Aristagoras ordered. Why, he asked, was Megabates meddling with things that did not concern him? When Aristagoras said this, Megabates was enraged, and when night came he sent men in a ship to Naxos to tell the Naxians all the danger that threatened them. The Naxians had not at all expected that this expedition was aimed at them. But when they were informed of it, they immediately brought inside the wall the property that was out in the fields, supplied themselves with food and drink as for a siege, and strengthened their wall. They were making preparations as though war were about to come upon them. Meanwhile, the others brought their ships across from Chios to Naxos, but when they attacked they found the Naxians well defended, and they besieged them for 4 months. Then the money the Persians had brought with them was all consumed, and Aristagoras himself had spent much besides, while the siege kept demanding more and more. So they built walls for the Naxian exiles and departed again to the mainland, having failed. Aristagoras was therefore unable to fulfill his promise to Artaphernes. At the same time he was hard pressed by the demand made on him for the expenses of the expedition, and he was afraid because the armament had failed and because he had become the enemy of Megabates. He supposed that he would be deprived of his rule over Miletus. With all these different fears upon him, he began to plan revolt. It also happened that just at this time the man whose head had been marked came from Histories at Susa, indicating that Aristagoras should revolt from the king. Histories wanted to signal to Aristagoras that he should revolt, but because the roads were guarded he could not do it safely in any ordinary way. So he shaved the hair from the head of the most faithful of his slaves, marked the head by pricking it, and waited until the hair had grown again. As soon as it had grown, he sent the slave away to Miletus, giving him no other instruction except this. When he arrived at Miletus, he was to tell Aristagoras to shave his hair and look at his head. The marks, as I have said, meant revolt. Histories did this because he was greatly vexed at being detained in Susa. He had strong hopes that, if a revolt occurred, he would be released to go to the sea coast, but if no change took place at Miletus, he had no expectation of ever returning there. Histories, then, was sending the messenger with this intention, and it happened that all these things came upon Aristagoras at the same time. He therefore took counsel with his partisans, declaring both his own opinion and the message from Histories. All the others expressed the same opinion and urged him to revolt. Hecateos the historian, however, first urged them not to undertake war against the king of the Persians, listing all the nations over whom Darius ruled and describing his power. When he did not succeed in persuading them, he next advised that they should contrive to make themselves masters of the sea. As far as he could see, he continued, this could happen in no other way, for he knew that the force of the Milesians was weak. But if the treasures in the temple at Branchidai were taken, the treasures dedicated there as offerings by Croesus the Lydian, he had great hopes that they might become masters of the sea. In this way they would not only have wealth at their own disposal, but the enemy would not be able to carry the treasures off as plunder. These treasures were of great value, as I have shown in the first part of the history. This opinion did not prevail. Nevertheless, it was resolved to revolt, and also that one of them should sail to Myus, where the force that had returned from Naxos was then stationed, and try to seize the commanders who had sailed in the ships. Ionian was sent for this purpose and seized by craft Oliatos son of Ibanoles of Mylasa, Hisios son of Timnes of Termera, Cos son of Erxander, to whom Darius had given Mytilene as a gift, Aristagoras son of Heraclides of Chyme, and many others. Then Aristagoras openly revolted and devised everything he could to harm Darius. First he pretended to give up the despotic power and grant equality to Miletus, so that the Milesians would be willing to revolt with him. Afterward he did the same thing throughout the rest of Ionia. Some of the despots he drove out, but those whom he had captured from the ships that had sailed with him to Naxos he handed over, because he wished to please their cities, delivering each man separately to the city from which he came. As soon as the men of Mytilene received Cos into their hands, they brought him out and stoned him to death. But the men of Chyme let their despot go, and most of the others also let theirs go. Thus the despots were deposed in the various cities. After Aristagoras the Milesian had deposed the despots, he ordered each people to appoint commanders in their several cities, and then he himself set out as an envoy to Lacedaemon. For in truth it was necessary for him to find some powerful alliance. At Sparta, Anaxandrides son of Leon was no longer living as king, but had ended his life, and Cleomenes son of Anaxandrides held the royal power, not because he had earned it by merit, but by right of birth. Anaxandrides had married his own sister's daughter, and he loved her very much, but no children were born to him by her. Because this was so, the Ephors summoned him before them, and told him that even if he would not take thought for himself in time, they could not allow the race of Eurysthenes to become extinct. Therefore, they said, he should put away the wife he then had, since she bore him no children, and marry another, and by doing this he would please the Spartans. He answered that he would do neither of these two things. They were not giving him honorable counsel, he said, when they advised him to send away the wife he had, though she had done him no wrong, and to take another into his house. In short, he would not follow their advice. At this the Ephors and the senators deliberated together, and made a new proposal to Anaxandrides. Since they saw that he was firmly attached to the wife he already had, they told him to consent to this, and not oppose it, lest the Spartans take some other counsel about him that might be unwelcome. They did not ask him to put away his present wife, rather he should give her everything he gave her now, and at the same time take another wife into his house in addition to her, to bear him children. When they spoke to him in this way, Anaxandrides consented. He had 2 wives, a thing not at all in the Spartan fashion. Not long afterward, the wife who had come in later bore the Cleomenes of whom I have spoken. Just as she was bringing to light an heir to the kingdom of the Spartans, the former wife, who before this had been childless, somehow conceived, happening to do so at that very time. Though she was truly pregnant, the relatives of the wife who had come in afterward heard of it, and cried out against her, saying that she was making an empty boast and intended to pass off someone else's child as her own. Since they made a great show of indignation, and since the time was drawing near, the Ephors, being suspicious, sat around the woman and watched her during the birth of her child. She bore Dorios, then immediately conceived Leonidas, and after him at once Cleombrotus. Indeed, some even say that Cleombrotus and Leonidas were twins. The wife who had borne Cleomenes, the one who came in after the first wife, and who was the daughter of Priamtid son of Demarmenos, did not bear another child. Now Cleomenes, it is said, was not quite in his right mind, but on the verge of madness, while Dorios was first among all men of his own age and felt sure that he would obtain the kingdom by merit. Since this was his opinion, when Anaxandrides died and the Lacedaemonians followed the usual custom, and set the eldest, Cleomenes, on the throne, Dorios was indignant. Thinking it unfit that he should be subject to Cleomenes, he asked the Spartans to give him a company of followers, and led them out to found a colony. He did this without asking the oracle at Delphi to what land he should go to settle, and without doing any of the things that are usually done. Instead, being angry, he sailed away with his ships to Libya, guided there by the Theraeans. When he came to Cnips, he made a settlement in the fairest place in all Libya, along the banks of the river. But in the 3rd year afterward he was driven out from there by the Maci, the Libyans, and the Carthaginians, and returned to the Peloponnesus. Then Antichares, a man of Ilion, gave Dorios advice from the oracles of Laos, telling him to make a settlement at Heraclea in Sicily. He said that the whole land of Eryx belonged to the Heraclidae, since Heracles himself had won it. Hearing this, Dorios went straight to Delphi to ask the oracle whether he would be able to conquer the land to which he was setting out, and the Pythian prophetess replied that he would conquer it. Dorios therefore took with him the armament he had previously led to Libya, and voyaged along the coast of Italy. At this time, the men of Sardis say, they and their king Teles were about to make an expedition against Croton, and the men of Croton, being extremely alarmed, asked Dorios to help them and obtain their request. So Dorios joined them in an expedition against Sardis, and helped them conquer Sardis. This is what the men of Sardis say about the actions of Dorios and his followers. But the men of Croton say that no stranger helped them in the war against the Sybarites except Callias alone, a diviner of Elis, and one of the descendants of Iamos. They say he helped them in this way. He ran away from Teles, the despot of the Sybarites, when the sacrifices did not prove favorable while he was sacrificing for the expedition against Croton, and so he came over to them. These, then, are the tales told by the 2 sides, and each side produces the following facts as evidence. The Sybarites point to a sacred enclosure and temple beside the dried-up bed of the Crathis, which they say Dorios set up to Athene called of the Crathis after he had taken part in the capture of the city. Besides this, they consider the death of Dorios himself to be very strong evidence, thinking that he perished because he acted contrary to the oracle given to him. If he had done nothing along the way, but had continued to do the task for which he was sent, he would have conquered the land of Eryx, and after conquering it he would have taken possession of it. Then neither he nor his army would have perished. On the other hand, the men of Croton declare that many things in the territory of Croton were granted as special gifts to Callias the Elesan, and that the descendants of Callias still possess them down to my time, while nothing was granted to Dorios or to the descendants of Dorios. If Dorios had truly helped them in the affair with Sardis, they say, many times as much would have been given to him as to Callias. These are the evidences that the 2 sides produce, and we may agree with whichever of them we think credible. Other Spartans also sailed with Dorios to be joint founders of the colony, Thessalos, Parabates, Callias, and Eurolon. When they reached Sicily with all their armament, they were killed, defeated in battle by the Phoenicians and the men of Egesta. Only Eurolon, among the joint founders, survived this disaster. He gathered the survivors of the expedition, took possession of Manoa, the colony of Selinus, and helped free the men of Selinus from their despot Pythagoras. Afterward, when he had deposed Pythagoras, he himself seized the despotism in Selinus and became sole ruler there, though only for a short time. The men of Selinus rose in revolt against him and killed him, even though he had fled for refuge to the altar of Zeus Agoraios. Philip, son of Butacides, a man of Croton, had accompanied Dorieus and died with him. This Philip had betrothed himself to the daughter of Teles the Sybarite, and because of that became an exile from Croton. Then, when he was disappointed in this marriage, he sailed away to Cyrene, from which he set out and accompanied Dorieus with a trireme of his own, himself paying the crew's expenses. This man had been a victor at the Olympic Games, and he was the most beautiful of the Hellenes who lived in his time. Because of his beauty he received from the men of Egesta what no one else ever received from them. They established a hero temple over his tomb, and they still propitiate him with sacrifices. In this way Dorieus ended his life. If he had endured being subject to Cleomenes and had remained in Sparta, he would have become king of Lacedaemon. For Cleomenes reigned for no very long time, and died leaving no son to succeed him, but only a daughter, whose name was Gorgo. However, Aristagoras, the despot of Miletus, arrived at Sparta while Cleomenes was reigning, and he came to speak with him. According to the Lacedaemonians, he had with him a bronze tablet on which was engraved a map of the whole earth, with all the sea and all the rivers. When he came to speak with Cleomenes, he urged him not to wonder at the earnestness with which he had come, for the matter stood like this. That the sons of the Ionians should be slaves instead of free was a reproach and a grief most of all to the Ionians themselves, but among all others especially to the Spartans, since they were the leaders of Hellas. Therefore, by the gods of Hellas, he entreated them to rescue from slavery the Ionians, who were their own kinsmen. They could easily accomplish this, he said, because the barbarians were not brave in battle, whereas the Spartans had reached the highest point of valor in matters of war. Their way of fighting was with bows and arrows and a short spear, and they went into battle wearing trousers and caps on their heads. Therefore they were easy to conquer. Then again, those who occupied the continent possessed good things in greater quantity than all the rest of the nations of the world together. First gold, then silver and bronze, embroidered garments, beasts of burden and slaves. All these, he said, the Spartans might have for themselves if they wished. The nations live in order, one after another, as I shall describe. Here are the Ionians, next to them are the Lydians, who not only live in fertile land, but are also exceedingly rich in gold and silver. Here next to the Lydians are the eastern Phrygians, who have the greatest number of sheep and cattle of any people I know, and also the most abundant crops. Next to the Phrygians are the Cappadocians, whom we call Syrians. Bordering them are the Cilicians, coming down to the sea, in which lies the island of Cyprus here. These pay 500 talents to the king as their yearly tribute. Next to these Cilicians are the Armenians, whom you may see here, and they too have great numbers of sheep and cattle. Next to the Armenians are the Machinians, occupying this country here. Next to them is the land of Kisha here, and in that land, beside this river Chospes, stands the city of Susa, where the great king has his residence, and where the money is stored in treasuries. After you have taken this city, you may then with good courage enter into a contest with Zeus in the matter of wealth. But can it be that you think yourselves bound to risk battles against Messenians and Arcadians and Argives, who are evenly matched against you, for the sake of land that is not very extensive or very fertile, and for borders that are only small, when these peoples have no gold or silver at all, for which desire drives a man to fight and die? Can this be, and will you choose some other way now, when it is possible for you easily to have rule over all Asia? Guests, friend from Miletus, I postpone my answer to you until the day after tomorrow. Thus far they advanced at that time. When the appointed day for the answer arrived, and they had come to the place agreed upon, Cleomenes asked Aristagoras how many days' journey it was from the sea of the Ionians to the residence of the king. Aristagoras, who in other respects acted cleverly and deceived him well, made a mistake on this point. If he desired to bring the Spartans out to Asia, he ought not to have told the truth, but in fact he said that the journey up from the sea took 3 months. Cleomenes cut short the rest of the account that Aristagoras had begun to give about the road. Guest, friend from Miletus, leave Sparta before the sun has set. You speak a word that does not sound well in the ears of the Lacedaemonians, since you desire to take them on a journey 3 months away from the sea. After Cleomenes had spoken in this way, he went away to his house. But Aristagoras took the suppliant's branch and went to the house of Cleomenes. Entering as a suppliant, he asked Cleomenes to send the child away and listen to him. The daughter of Cleomenes was standing beside him. Her name was Gorgo, and as it happened, she was his only child, then 8 or 9 years old. Cleomenes, however, told Aristagoras to say whatever he wished to say, and not to stop because of the child. Then Aristagoras began to promise him money, starting with 10 talents, if Cleomenes would do for him what he was asking. When Cleomenes refused, Aristagoras kept increasing the sums of money he offered, until at last he had promised 50 talents. "Father, the stranger will harm you, if you do not leave him and go." Cleomenes was pleased by the child's advice, and went away into another room. Aristagoras departed from Sparta altogether, and had no further opportunity to explain the road up from the sea to the residence of the king. As for this road, the truth is as follows. Along the whole road there are royal stages and excellent resting places, and the entire road passes through inhabited and safe country. Through Lydia and Phrygia there extend 20 stages, amounting to 94.5 leagues. After Phrygia comes the river Halys, where there is a gate through which one must pass in order to cross the river, and a strong guard post is established there. After crossing over into Cappadocia, the road from there to the borders of Cilicia is 28 stages, or 104 leagues. On the borders of the Cilicians, one passes through 2 separate gates and by 2 separate guard posts. After passing these, the journey through Cilicia is 3 stages, amounting to 15.5 leagues. The boundary between Cilicia and Armenia is a navigable river called Euphrates. In Armenia, the number of stages with resting places is 15, and the distance is 56.5 leagues. There is also a guard post on the road. From Armenia, when one enters the land of Macedon, there are 34 stages, amounting to 137 leagues. Through this land flow 4 navigable rivers, which cannot be crossed except by ferries. The first is the Tigris. Then come a second and third, both called by the same name, though they are not the same river and do not flow from the same region. For the first of these comes from the Armenian land, and the other from that of the Macedonians. Fourth river is called Gins, the same river that Cyrus once divided into 360 channels. Passing from there into the Kishan land, there are 11 stages, 42.5 leagues, to the river Chosps, which is also navigable, and on this river the city of Susa is built. The total number of these stages is 111. This is the number of stages with resting places for someone going up from Sardis to Susa. If the royal road has been correctly measured in leagues, and if the league is equal to 30 furlongs, as it certainly is, then the distance from Sardis to what is called the Palace of Memnon is 13,500 furlongs, the number of leagues being 450. So if a person travels 150 furlongs each day, exactly 90 days are spent on the journey. Thus Aristagoras the Milesian spoke correctly when he told Cleomenes the Lacedaemonian that the journey up from the sea to the residence of the king was one of 3 months. But if anyone asks for an even more exact statement, I will give that too. We must add to this the length of the road from Ephesus to Sardis. Accordingly, I say that the whole number of furlongs from the Sea of Hellas to Susa, for by that name the city of Memnon is known, is 14,040, for the distance from Ephesus to Sardis is 540 furlongs. Thus the 3 months' journey is lengthened by 3 days more.
And we will halt there, with Aristagoras turned away from Sparta, the royal road stretching 3 months deep into Asia, and the revolt still hungry for a great ally. Next time, in part 27, he tries Athens instead, and to explain why Athens listens, Herodotus turns back the clock to tell how the city threw off its tyrants, with daggers hidden in myrtle and the help of Delphi. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.